Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Thursday, and I've got 30 random books for you. Basically, because Thursday and 30 start with the same two letters. And because I love talking about books with you. So I thought we'd just go through a long list of books and see if maybe some of them are of interest to you, maybe some you didn't know about. We'll start with a bookish murder mystery. It's not the only time where books and mysteries coincide on this list. This is one of a series about Inspector De Vincenzi. This is Death in a Bookstore. Uh, don't know that I've seen much of this series in United States retail bookstores, but it's terrific. Really smart, really good whodunits, very bookish. Not just this one set in a bookstore, but all the others. Very atmospheric. Then to stick with the Italian theme here, we have Paul Strathern's book, The Florentines, uh, which is about the great signature figures of the Italian Renaissance. There you have three of them. There are about three others that really get Strathern's main attention in this book. A very personalized look at the Renaissance in a way that has been popular for, well, ever since the Renaissance. It's been a popular way to look at the Renaissance, but Strathern is good. This is a good popular history of the subject. Then we have a big fat biography. I found this last week at the Brattle Bookshop. This is Victoria Glendinnings's biography of Anthony Trollope. Uh, it's been my experience with literary biographies of any kind that they will stand or fall not so much on the author's ability to construct the life of their subject, but in the author's ability to engage with the author's work. It's a terrible two-pronged qualification system that only exists for literary biographies. I don't think we use this yardstick for any other kind of subject. Like, for instance, I don't think that I myself, just speaking as myself, I don't think that I would be as sharp with a biographer of Teller or Einstein who did not understand physics at a postgraduate level. I don't think I would be as sharp with them as I am with literary biographers who just gum all over the works and don't know them, don't really understand them at all, or flat out misunderstand them, flat out are wrong about them. I've lost track of how many literary biographies I've had to write letters to the editor, write letters to the publisher saying, on page 300, the biographer refers to this as the author's debut in French. It's not. Documentarily, it's not. So you might want to correct that in future editions. It's annoying to come across those kinds of things, and even worse than that, I think, in some ways, is when the author of a literary biography doesn't seem to really understand the works or piece together the threads that bind them. Uh, and that's more true of Trollope than anybody else. Or it's not maybe more true, but very true of Trollope. He had a big active life. He had a pressing real world job. He had that he cared about and innovated in. It wasn't just that he was an insurance clerk or bank clerk. He had a big family that he more or less a little bit cared about. He had all sorts of meetings with people, uh, two professional lives that he kept up, which is a fact that I always use to bludgeon the heads of lazy young writers who say that because they have an antihistamine appointment with their doctor in 3 weeks, they really can't do any writing today. I usually use Trollope's life as a way to bludgeon them for the lazy sots that they are. But that dual life also presents an incredible temptation to an author to concentrate on the who, the where, the when did you take your carriage, and how much were you earning this year, which they can nail down, and stint on the literary stuff. What's going on in the novels? What's going on in the works? And uh, Victoria Glendinning, fortunately, does not do that. I guess what I'm trying to say is, with a Trollope author, really with any literary author, I want the sense that the writer likes the works. I don't know that that's unreasonable on my part. I want the sense that the writer is familiar with and likes the works. Otherwise, why am I reading your biography of this person? When their only claim to our fame, their only claim to our attention at all, is their literary works. No one would read a biography of Trollope, much less the three that I found last week, for his innovations in the postal system. So anyway, this one passed that test. Then we have something I cannot believe. I pulled this cover off the internet. I cannot believe how fast time has flown with this particular thing. The cover, the new cover of this novel. Some of these books I've shown you before on this channel. I've shown you thousands and thousands of books on this channel. So some of them I've shown you before. Some of them I haven't. I didn't really scrutinize 9,000 videos in order to find out why. But all of them came to my mind just as a random nosegay of books. And this one is Boy Culture, a gay novel. You gotta have something for the gays, by Matthew Rediman. Only the new cover says it's the 25th anniversary edition. How can it be 25 years since this book came out? I have no idea how that happened. What kind of wormhole that made that possible? This is a slim gay novel that Matthew Rediman wrote in a different world about a young male hustler who has a thick appointment book, among other things, and he is a rent boy, essentially. If you look up the slang definition of that word, he's a rent boy, which means he goes out and meets men for sexual liaisons, for money. They don't come to, the equivalent of a whorehouse. He goes to them. And the organizing conceit of the book, no offense to Matthew Rediman, this is a very conceited book on every level, but the organizing conceit of the book is that the boy in question has no idea what kind of, as he puts it, monster is going to open the door. This was written before instantaneously knowing everything about every person who's ever existed in the history of the world. This is before, well, as a young friend of mine is a thorough denizen of this world. He's only 22 years old, and he's been in this world. It's the only world that he knows. It's the only world that exists anymore. And sometimes he talks to me. Sometimes we will talk about the differences between that world and the world in which this novel was originally written. I remember one particular conversation that we had where I was talking about how, it's amazing that digital natives, so-called digital natives of the 21st century, can find out anything at all about someone in no time at all, without sophisticated search algorithms or anything like that. Just they know where to look. They know where to go for these things. And he completely agreed, complacently agreed. Said, yeah, I can find out, you give me a person's name, I can find out where they went to school and where they live in about a minute. If I try really hard, in about 2 minutes, I can get their credit history. And it'll take me about 3 minutes to get their dick pics. To get the stuff they shared on burner accounts that is supposed to self-destruct. On the internet, everything is forever, I guess, except for old articles of mine. But naturally, with a conceit like that in this novel, you, the reader, are expecting the expectation that is raised, the Garth Greenwell expectation that is raised, is that one of these days our main character is going to open the door, and it's not going to be a monster. It's going to be true love, the white picket fence version that all of these allegedly subversive novels were all yearning for. I'm not sure that I know it's heresy, but I'm not sure that I prefer this cover to the original one. The original one had pants, but nevertheless. Then we have a vintage mystery next. Again, there's no rhyme or reason to how these things were assembled. No guarantee that I like the books or don't like the books. No guarantee that I've talked about them with you or not before. Just a random 30 on Thursday. This is by William Targ, and it is The Case of Mr. Cassidy. It's going on 100-year-old classic murder mystery. It's very hard-boiled, very Sam Spade-ish in a way that there is a mystery here. If you're a veteran reader of mysteries, it's not going to take you very long to figure out what happened. There's a weird plot twist at the end that only exists to be a plot twist. It's ridiculous. But the thing is written in a kind of, there's that tough guy Chicago voice that I guess it has a certain amount of conviction. It kind of wore on me. After a while, it kind of wore on me. I think this is the only book by William Targ that I've ever read. Don't know if William Targ is a pseudonym, but I think I would need to reserve judgment until I've read more by this author. So we will see. Maybe he has a whole bunch of books. Then we have a book, an author I've read a lot. I love. This is a reread. This is Alistair Horn. This is his book, The Price of Glory, about Verdun in the Battle of World War One. Much like Boy Culture, where I don't have that new 25th anniversary cover. I don't have this cover either. I have this in a crappy old battered hardcover with no dust jacket at all. I'd love to find a nice copy of this because it's rereadable. Alistair Horn is very rereadable. And this is, you probably know the basic outlines of the Battle of Verdun. It's pretty grim reading. And he does it justice in a way that I prefer to a lot of the ways that popular military historians write today. And in addition to which, it's more eloquent. So a strong recommend. Not that I'm recommending or not recommending any of these. I'm just talking about them. That's all. The next one, Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. This is the first book in what looked for a while there to be the unending Wheel of Time series. Epic fantasy, very indebted to Tolkien, very indebted to that kind of a sensibility. And I know that it's heretical for Robert Jordan fans, although I've never met a Robert Jordan fan that actually disagrees with me on this subject. I have maintained from the third book in this series, from when I finished the third book in this series, which was around the time when the author was saying in every interview that he could get, that he didn't intend to stop writing this series until they nailed his coffin closed. I maintained at the end of the third book in this series that if he had orchestrated this, intentionally written it as a trilogy, it would be considered one of the great towering classics of the genre. And Robert Jordan fans that I've known have said, well, I love the whole series. I love all the books. It feels a little disloyal to agree with you, but I see what you mean. It would have been pretty impressive as a trilogy. Those Robert Jordan fans would nominate it anyway. And it turns out that posthumous acclaim for the series, posthumous affection for it, has nominated it for that kind of accolades anyway, even though it's endlessly long and had to be finished by someone else, had to be finished by someone other than the author, which is a pattern that it more or less started with this series. It's going to become the norm. I think it's going to become the norm. There are ongoing fantasy series now that are deeply beloved by their readers whose authors are very clearly not going to finish them. They have no interest. In fact, haven't written a word, haven't thought about it. George R.R. Martin is the foremost example. Hasn't thought about A Song of Ice and Fire in years. I'm not talking about it. Hasn't thought about how to wrangle this particular scene of the next book down on paper. No, he hasn't thought about the world, the events at all in years. He is not going to finish the series. And he's not the only one. There are plenty of other writers who are constantly promising and then not delivering that on ongoing fantasy series that, if they're popular enough, will be finished by someone else. Not sure that Song of Ice and Fire will be finished by Brandon Sanderson. I'm not sure that he needs to do anything since he's a squintillionaire. But he might want to. And that would be pretty funny. That would be a pretty funny literary anecdote if he finishes the Eye of the World series and then finishes Game of Ice and Fire, or Song of Ice and Fire as well. It would get him a kind of a reputation. But this is a standard story in this first book. It's the standard story with a few neat elaborations. The standard story of the ordinary farm boy, the ordinary plow boy, who has a hidden destiny and is the focal point in between the forces of a battle between the forces of light and darkness. A variation on that basic pattern is at the heart of Lord of the Rings. And here it's got a few twists to it that are interesting. Very, very much interesting. This is a good book to read. One of the twists is that the powers of good are not 100% sure who that destined person is. There are 5 candidates. And another twist is that the foremost example, the foremost company of the forces of good is an all-female society of wizards, which is interesting in its own right, and is further delved into in later books. You get a lot of world building in later books, but world building only takes you so far. Picture 2 unsalted crackers, and then picture the most delicious cucumber and buttered spinach do that you ladle onto one cracker and then squish between the two of them. So it's just the perfect combination of buttery and salty, the perfect combination of that bright green taste in your mouth. World building is the crackers. Okay. Too many fantasy fans and way too many fantasy authors think that world building is the stuff in between. No, world building is the crackers. And the way that you demonstrate that, the way that you can prove that, is take away the stuff in the middle. And what you'll be left with is book 7, book 8, book 9, except for a couple of scenes and a couple of characters, book 10 in this series. The later books in this series are just world building. They're just elaboration. There's almost nothing else happening in them. They're all cracker. But I don't. That isn't the fault of this book. This is a classic old mass market paperback. This book is quite good. Sorry, I'm getting longer and longer winded with each of these. This tends to happen to me when I talk about books. This next one is The Diary of Lady Murasaki. The author of The Tale of Genji, Murasaki Shikibu, kept a diary of her daily life, little vignettes, little scenes that she saw, little thoughts that were prompted by the weather, reflections on a semi-formal position that she had as a teacher to a young empress. In other words, this is, if you read the Pillow Book of Sei Shonagon, which is exactly the same thing as I just described. It's a book full of little dramatic glimpses. Little, oh, this happened today. I'm not at all systematically describing the day. I'm just describing this thing. I saw a rainbow in the sky over a trout pond. And I just want to describe that. I want to put that down on paper, but I don't have anything else to say about the day. I'm not contextualizing this in any way. People who read the Pillow Book of Sei Shonagon think, boy, this is really, really interesting stuff. If only the author weren't such a self-evident nitwit. And that's what this book is. This book is the answer to those thoughts. This is a version of the Pillow Book in which the author is not a nitwit, in which the author is genuinely perceptive. This is the cover of a Penguin Classic, which I do not have. Penguin Classic is not here in this room. I've got a whole bunch of them. I don't have this one. But it's very, very good. It's not nearly as long as Tale of Genji, but then what is? But it's very, very good. Then we have a book edited by Declan Burke and John Connolly called Books to Die For. This is an anthology of authors talking about great murder mysteries. So endlessly fascinating. It's just endlessly great. You just read this over and over and over again. And it will do what the best anthologies like this always do. It will send you hurrying off to find series that you either have never read or that you've read and dismissed. I'm not sure that William Targ is even mentioned in here, but it will certainly have that effect on you. It had that effect on me, and it's fascinating anyway to watch the combination of author and book under discussion. Then we have a romance novel. This is by Erin Knightley, who is surefire to please. She cannot fail. This is The Viscount Risks It All, in which a young Viscount, is head over heels in love with a young woman, the woman of his dreams, the only woman for him, etc., 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 and waits too long to tell her that, so that she is swept away and married. And it ruins him. It devastates him. And in retrospect, when you finish the book, you're all caught up with it when you're reading the book. Erin Knightley's really good about that. But when you finish the book, you're thinking, well, gee, that wasn't all that much for you to get over. I don't know why that sent you to pieces the way it did. You poor little thing. But it does. And it freezes his insides, and it makes sure that he doesn't make himself vulnerable at all anymore. It's a little silly. But the young woman in question eventually comes back into his life, and they get a second chance. It's really, the female character the female lead in this book is really well done. Erin Knightley does not give the reader the dumb, easy out of making her husband loutish. She loved him, but she was not in love with him. I could have stood, it would, of course, wouldn't sell in the romance world, but I could have stood reading a whole serious literary novel, not a romance, just about their life together, before she goes back into the burly arms of her handsome Viscount. I would have stood to read that. That would have been interesting. But this is interesting, too. Then we have something, this is by Becky Albertalli and Adam Silvera. Adam Silvera is famous as the author of They Both Die at the End. And Becky Albertalli is famous for Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda that became the movie Love, Simon, with a miscast lead and miscast secondary characters. And they decided to team up for a young gay romance. You got to have even more for the gays. This is What If It's Us? And the cover is a cartoon depiction of the skinny jean meet cute of the two main characters, who are both they are both mid 2010s vapid Twitter fiends brought to life. They're TikTok brought to life. Becky Albertalli and Adam Silvera both have a genuine talent and also large amounts of writerly weaknesses. One weakness that they share is not exactly writerly, although it is synonymous with writers in the 21st century, and which is easily fixable. Most writerly deficiencies are not easily fixable. But one deficiency that they share in common is easily fixable. They should be told by their respective publishers, if you go on social media, under any account whatsoever, your name, our name, a fake name, you're fired. And we want all the advance money we've ever sent you back. And if you don't have it back to us in a cashier's check at 9 a.m. tomorrow, we'll take you to court. If you go anywhere near social media, you're fired. Publishers will never tell them that, of course, but that would solve that one particular deficiency, because they're raving, frothing at the mouth psychopaths on social media. But they have strengths as writers, but they also have weaknesses. And it turns out when they collaborate, the strengths go right out the window and they enhance each other's weaknesses. I have tried 2 times to like this book and its sequel. And fans love it. Fans are on Team Character A and Team Character B. Fans cosplay. I don't know why it was on my mind. I've already given something to the gays. Boy culture is actually good. I can't speak for the rest of Matthew Redman's work, but boy culture is actually good. But it was on my mind. I don't know, maybe someday, maybe a 25th anniversary edition, maybe I'll give it another try. Then we have an old novel by a novelist who is no longer known at all. That's a terrible shame. He's really good. If you like historical thrillers or even just thrillers, he's really, really good. He will make you realize, as very few thriller writers do, how much crap you put up with just because it's the only thing there. The author's name is Stephen Becker. He's really good. And he wrote, the book that I most often talk to you about is The Blue-Eyed Sean, which is great. Also, When This War Is Over, his great American Civil War novel. But this is just another one, The Chinese Bandit, about a Caucasian mercenary who ends up in the wilds of mercenary China, in the wilds of various bandit bands and quasi-legal authorities, and it's wonderful. It's brutal, but wonderful. Just perfectly done and really well written. Stephen Becker is a really good writer, and I don't think anything by him is in print anymore. And I think the bulk of what he wrote hasn't been in print except the one time when he wrote it 60 years ago. And that's a shame. It's a shame that the reading world overlooks him. Then we have something by Bruce Lancaster. By could almost be in air quotes here, but this is his book From Lexington to Liberty. This is part of a series of books on different periods of American history. Bruce Lancaster's collaborator, Bruce Catton, did a volume in this series on the Civil War. This is on the American Revolution. You can see at the bottom there why I might put his name in air quotes, because Lou Gannett never encountered a book without making it better. And if that took a little bit of gene grafting from his own literary abilities, well, no one's going to complain about that. But nevertheless, this is tremendously engaging, and it has an allure that a multi-volume, more specified monograph on this subject would not for me. I have, as I mentioned on this channel, I have a bit of a sweet tooth for one-volume popular histories of things like this. There's an art form to it. It can be done well or done poorly, and I think this is done well. I just found a hardcover copy of this at the Brattle last week and realized, as usual, as I usually do, that I haven't reread it since it first came out, so I will be rereading it to see what its strengths and weaknesses are. That naturally brought me to this next one, another American Revolution, this one kind of a minor classic. This is by Thomas Fleming, And this cover, which again I found on the internet, says it's the 50th anniversary edition. I think that anniversary has come and gone, but I still don't know where that time went. This is his book, Now We Are Enemies, about the Battle of Bunker Hill. I think when this was reprinted in hardcover and in paperback, I believe it was given a different title. I think Now We Are Enemies was only the title in the original edition. But this is this is the story, the lead up to, and then a minute by minute breakdown, as far as we can, of the beginning of an armed confrontation, the beginning of the American Revolution on the battlefield, with Bunker Hill and Lexington and Concord and whatnot. The author's really, really good at it. This was when this thing, I think this thing first came out in the late 50s or early 60s, something like that, and you could not get away from it. Everybody was reading it, and justifiably so. It's tremendous reading experience. So I'm happy to recommend it. Wish that I could more thoroughly recommend this next one. It is a great book, but it is dated, fatally dated. It's More in Sorrow by Walcott Gibbs, who used to be able to introduce him by saying Walcott Gibbs of the New Yorker. But Walcott Gibbs is, I think, 60 years dead. No one at the New Yorker remembers him. No New Yorker readers remember him. But once upon a time, he was an institution at the New Yorker magazine. And this is a great collection of his work. I just found a nice hardcover of this to replace the battered paperback that I have. The only reason that I sound ambivalent about it is because 90% of it will not be comprehensible to a modern audience. This is a collection of his columns, his social commentaries, and also his theater reviews. And in the whole book, only the theater reviews will really hold up to a read in the 21st century by someone who doesn't want to research the minutiae of the social issues of the 1930s. Someone who isn't up on the kind of history that tends to be reflected in the New Yorker is only going to get value out of the theater reviews here. And that's all right. I guess from your library, you might try. Your library's not going to have a copy of this, but I was picking and choosing my way through it once I found that hardcover and realizing that so much of the commentary here is just dated to oblivion. You would need 8 footnotes at the bottom of every page to explain it, and even then you wouldn't get the current, the way it felt alive at the time. Unfortunately, that's true of a lot of people who did commentary like this. The large bulk of the writings of, for instance, Dorothy Parker or Mary McCarthy date in the same way. And this next one is Carl Sagan's book, Broca's Brain, a series of connected essays about scientific topics that were interesting him at the time. Critics of this book, especially critics in the last 20 years, will look at his mistakes in here, how the various scientific disciplines that he writes about have moved on, or that maybe he had only an over-enthusiastic understanding of them while he was writing about it. It's willing to grant all of that. I'm not sure that all of it is as true as his critics say, but I'm willing to grant it all for the brilliance of how this is written. It is just so absorbing. He might have misunderstood the direction of gene sequencing or the latest hominoid finds, but the books that do understand those things are stultifyingly dull. Whereas if you hand this book to someone, you will make a science fan out of them. And in the 21st century, heading into the year 2025, science fans are in desperately short supply. We need as many of them as we can get. And it's also wonderful reading. Then we have a reprint. This is Sightline Books. At least mercifully, they don't put the anniversary on the cover. I don't want to know. This is Joseph Woodcrutch. I think we've seen this book in a later reprint on this channel years ago. This is The Desert Year. Rather nice cover. I don't have this cover. And this is his book about the ecology of the desert, about the animals that live there and what they do by day and by night and at dawn, what they do for water, what they do for predation. Just a simple natural history, but beautifully written. Beautifully, wonderfully done. So perfect example of natural history done really well. And then we have Tanith Lee, fantasy author who's not always my cup of tea. Although this book I need to reread. I remember liking a lot of what was going on under the surface of this book. So much of this book is under the surface. It actually makes me wonder if maybe a lot of what she wrote just in general is so much under the surface, and maybe that's why I haven't liked her as much as I should. Maybe I should reread a lot of her. But this is Dark Castle White Horse, the old paperback cover of this, about a sleeping beauty, about a young woman who's enchanted and ensorcelled and needs to be awoken and brought into the world, and we need the reader, the plot needs to figure out why someone has gone to the bother of making her essentially dormant. And a young man on a very strange mount comes to see what he can do about that. And we don't know much about him either. It's mystery solving a mystery about another mystery. And I need to reread this. I remember really, really enjoying it, though. Especially since a lot of this novel is engaged in what the 21st century obnoxiously refers to as subversion of expectations. It wasn't meant to be that. That is the only goal now in, for instance, Hollywood. It's not subversion of expectations in order to make you think or in order to highlight other expectations. It's just to disappoint you. That's all. Hollywood uses the term subversion of expectations, but what they mean is that their goal is to disappoint you. That's not this. This was written 50 years ago, long before that noxious ideology took hold. So I need to reread it, and maybe the rest of Tanith Lee. Maybe I need to reread the rest as well. And then we have Richard Ellis, a prolific author, well worth your time to get to know. This is his book, Monsters of the Sea, which is about actual monsters, Leviathan and Kraken and whatnot, but also about all sorts of things in the sea that were once considered monstrous that we now have explanations for. Once upon a time, you could find this book in bookstores. Richard Ellis's books are all worth finding. This one's probably the most fun to just revisit and page through. It's not really meant to be read from front to back, but it'll work either way. Then we have another book that I'm sure that I've recommended many times before on this channel. Never had this cover, thank God. This is The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula Le Guin. Slim science fiction novel about a young man whose dreams have the ability to change reality. And what happens when someone finds that out? What happens when his psychiatrist finds out that this man who is under the delusion that his dreams change reality is actually telling the truth? Well, then what would happen if that power fell into someone else's hands, if someone else could manipulate that? And all spurring from the darkest of all possible places and going to a fairly dark place. Terrific. It's terrific how much Le Guin works into that one little volume. I'm going to hurry this up here because we're out of time and it looks like we're out of light as well. This next one is by Armand Marie Leroy. This is his book, Mutants. Don't let the cover fool you. This is about the kind of mutants that an unenlightened previous generation would have paid to see in a circus, yes. But it's also about you and me. It's about the process of mutation, which happens in every person on Earth. Every person born is a mutant. You have hundreds and hundreds. You're born with hundreds and hundreds of genetic variations from either of your parents. And you develop some as you go on, and your kids will be the same way. So, and this book, it's provocatively covered and provocatively titled, but it's very good disquisition on the process of mutation in humans. Very interesting, very good popular science. Same as this next one. This next one is Leila Phillips' book, Beaverland, which I think we might have even seen in Galley on this channel. All about beavers and how they changed the country of America. Not only how they changed the country in terms of the massive beaver fur trade that existed and that almost single-handedly defined the westward expansion of this country in the same way that the cod fisheries defined the eastern dominance of the same time period. But also how beavers changed the land themselves. Beavers are natural ecological engineers. They have a fairly boring, pudgy childhood, and then they immediately start getting to work, and they work for the rest of their lives, changing things. You put a beaver pair in an area, and they will immediately start changing it, always for the better. Maybe not for the better of human agriculture, but always for the better of the surrounding area, even long term for the betterment of human agriculture. And this book is great on the subject. One of probably 5 beaver books that I've read in the last 20 years that I really enjoyed. And then this next one is by Lois Lowry, who you will all know as the author of The Giver. This is her book, Number of the Stars. Very touching young adult novel about a family in Antwerp who realizes that the rising Nazi aggression all around them is not a passing thing. It's not just the next 4 years. And that it's targeting their Jewish friends and neighbors. and it's not deportation. It's not discriminating. It's just wide scale. So they take in a young girl and pretend that she's part of the family to save her life. But it escalates from there. And again, like with The Lathe of Heaven, it does a miraculous amount in a very small amount of pages. Tremendous reading experience, tremendously powerful reading experience. Okay, then we have John Stanley. This is great. It is a must-have for you movie fans. This is his book, Creature Features, where he goes through every single science fiction and fantasy TV and movie that you could think of. It's all done in like a Leonard Maltin style, where it's or David Thompson would be a better example, David Thompson's Guide to Film, because it's not just that you're getting a brief entry, what this thing is, when it came out, who directed it, who starred in it. You're also getting incredibly snarky, opinionated summaries, and they are great. They are fantastic, even if you don't agree with them, and you won't agree with a lot of them. But like David Thompson, they're priceless in that regard. They'll make you think about everything that you think you know. I don't know if it's still in print, but it is tremendous. Is Leonard Maltin on the cover? Yeah, he is. Leonard Maltin's actually on the cover of the book. But it's well worth your time to hunt down a copy if you're a fan of this sort of thing. If you've ever seen the movie Predator, and you haven't read John Stanley's book, Creature Features, then you have to rectify that. And that's just one science fiction movie. There are endless others. Then we have, speaking of endless, this is Sean Carroll's book, Endless Forms Most Beautiful. Quote from Darwin there on the cover. This is about Evo Devo. So evolutionary development. It's the study of what we can do with Darwin's basic theory if we understand genomics in a way that he, of course, did not. Then how would you elaborate that? How would you look at evolution by means of natural selection, Darwinian evolution, if in light of these new technologies where you're looking at certain genes, where you can look at at stuff on the animals on the cellular level, and you're suddenly seeing an absolutely non-coincidental amount of genetic identicality, not just similarity, but identicality between spiders and water buffaloes. It's Evo Devo is studying a lot of the later scientific discoveries, and Sean Carroll is a pretty good writer on the subject, but his subject is studying all sorts of later scientific discoveries that resoundingly corroborate Darwin's idea of evolution by means of natural selection from common ancestry. They resoundingly corroborate it. And it's fascinating. Sean Carroll has a long history teaching undergraduates, and it shows in his book. He makes it interesting. Then we have something by Juliet Alpern. This is Demon Fish, her book about great white sharks. This is the way the cover actually looked. Wish I had a copy of this. It's really, really well done, really engagingly done. The cover is a gigantic, engorged, probably gravid female great white shark. But they're pretty big anyway, even when they're not pregnant. And they're menacing. They are a wild animal in the world that can easily kill a human that ventures into their territory. One of only a dozen or so wild animals, megafauna, that can do that. So they get demonized, hence the title. But this is a tremendously affectionate look at the natural history of great white sharks. Then we have a novel, The Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki. This was high on a list of my favorite novels for this particular year, basically about a young boy who hears voices, but it ends up being a lot about those voices. It ends up being a polyphony of voices all throughout the novel, marvelously controlled. I really have never read anything by this author like this book. Strongly recommended if you can find maybe a paperback. Then we have an older biography. This is a new cover that I found online. Mine doesn't have a cover. It's just an old hardcover. But this is like 100 years old. Don't let the color of the cover fool you. This is by R.W. Chambers, and it's his biography of Thomas More. Chambers is fantastic. No matter what he's writing about, he's fantastic. Complete control of the subject, but also very eloquent in a way that, I don't mean to sound cynical, has vanished from the academic world, all but completely. So no matter what you think about Thomas More, whether or not you're, pro or con Wolf Hall's idea of him, or pro or con My Man for All Seasons, you're still going to find this fascinating. It's also really, really good on Henry VIII himself, which is kind of rare in any kind of biographical treatment of him or any of his ministers. Then we have something by Miriam Griffin. Again, this is not the cover that I have. This is her biography of Nero, End of a Dynasty, the last of the Julio-Claudians. where she gives Nero as much credit as you possibly can from the sources that we have. Most of the sources that we have uh, are prejudice against Nero. So you have to dig really hard to find out what he was like. The foremost example of that motivation for that digging comes from no less a source than another Roman emperor, the Roman Emperor Trajan, who was asked, "Who are your greatest predecessors?" and said that Nero was one of them for the first 5 years of his reign. Trajan is universally regarded as a great Roman emperor, so that means a lot. And you wonder, when you read it, Griffin does a really good job digging through what we know and don't know about the actual Nero as opposed to the scandal sheet. Although you get all the scandal too. It's really enjoyable in that regard. And then we can finish up here. Sorry, a long video. I ran out of sunlight. We can finish up here with another biography. This thing's huge, like 1,000 pages long. This is Ralph Griffith's biography of the reign of Henry VI. Henry VI, widely regarded by history, by all biographers, by Shakespeare, as a weirdly ineffectual king, a weak man, a mentally deranged man, an odd, spotty figure who didn't have any consistency, couldn't really hold the crown, didn't deserve to hold the crown. And it's impressive how Griffith resists all of that in this book. This is one of the only truly sober and unbelievably comprehensively researched looks at this figure that I've ever seen. There were two later, much shorter, one-volume biographies of this guy that basically just take the canards of popular biography and run with them. Let's not dig any deeper. What was it about Henry VI? What about him? There are plenty of biographies of this figure that don't do that. This book does. It's a long haul. Henry VI is nowhere near as interesting as his predecessor or any of his successors. And the author knows that. And the author considers it his duty to go into the nitty-gritty. I mean, it's not the broader picture is not all that interesting anyway compared to some of the stalwarts on either side of him. So, and tax legislation is not going to be interesting no matter who you're writing about. But the author gives you all of that. So this is not a biography for beginners. You have to be interested in medieval history. But if you are, this is the final word, I think, the final word on the subject, even though it's like 70 years old. And there you go. Sorry for us to go on so long. That is just 30 books for Thursday. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.